All right, so today we're going to explore Impressionistic painting with Painter Master Karen Bonaker. And Karen is a woman of many talents, and she's been painting traditionally since she was a young girl. And then she discovered Painter about 15 years ago and has been using it ever since. And that's very lucky for us because she generates so much wonderful learning content. In addition to being a master, she's also on our Painter Advisory Board, and she's the founder of Digital Art Academy. If you haven't visited Digital Art Academy, I encourage you to do so. She teaches classes there, and I've actually signed up for her Open Studio Impressionist painting course that starts in September. So with all of that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Karen.
Hi, and thank you, Tanya. I'm here. Okay, and thanks, Tanya, and thanks everybody for coming today. And today I would like to demonstrate some really exciting experiments that you can work with not only in portrait painting but still life digital painting sessions as well. One of the things that I have been working with for many, many years is patterns, paper textures, overlays, and I have a real love for texture in my work. And because I have come from a traditional background of painting, or specifically watercolor painting, one of the things that I love to incorporate into my painting process is lots of texture and finding new ways of incorporating texture. The possibilities of using textures within your paintings is really, endless. And the possibilities that you're going to see here, I think, are some fun techniques that you are going to have a great time experimenting with. The upcoming Fall Open Studio Impressionist painting at Digital Art Academy is a tribute to some of the women Impressionists of the 19th century. And one of my favorite artists of that time was Bertha Morisot. Bertha lived in Paris in the later 19th century and was subject to a real strict code of social rules at that time. So I think this was the part, these were the women, the Impressionist women that I just became infatuated with and learning about how they were able to develop their love for art, and in a time that really socially they were oppressed to a certain point. At that time, women were really encouraged to develop interests in music, decorative arts, painting. And such interests were seen more as ways to refine oneself rather than to be seen as a career path like many women of today do. These are just little examples that I want to show you of some of the techniques that we're going to be exploring today. We're going to be using Painter 12, the latest version, 0.2. And we're going to be working with various brushes, custom and default, and using overlay composite methods to enhance the watercolor emulation while working more in an impressionistic style of painting. The skill level basically is intermediate, but I'm going to try and go through these steps very slowly so you'll understand them, and please feel free to ask questions as we go forward as well. These examples I'm showing you are all done using these techniques, working very spontaneously and considering color harmony. So I'm kind of a stickler for working with complementary colors. So I do a lot of my own mixing with colors in the mixer pad in Painter. I wanted to also mention that the brushes that I'm going to be using today, along with the riff file that I will be using, I will make available to you on my blog, KarenBonakerArt.com, and I will make sure that you all get those brushes and the riff file that you might want to use just as an experiment to practice with. So I think you'll have a lot of fun with that. I also used a lot of brushes from Skips, bristly dabs in these two paintings here. This one of was a kind of a takeoff from one of Ava Gardner's The Sparrow painting, which I kind of used my own creativity in and had some fun with, and created more of a fantasy type elf look using some of my custom Sargent brushes, some of Skip's bristly dab brushes, and a set of gold leaf brushes, which are also available at Skip's website, skipallenpaints.com. Overlays of textures can add interest to your piece, and but too much texture can also be a challenge, and so when we're working this way, we want to find something that works very, looks like it feels like it's part of the painting and not outside of the painting. So that's where the challenge does come in. Oftentimes, if too much texture is applied, it can be distracting and can take away from the subject matter. So finding that balance is real important. My little granddaughter Quinn is such an inspiration, and in these last examples here before we get started, these are all examples of overlays of textures that I use to enhance the theme. This one was done with the thick acrylic paints, Sargent brushes, and watercolor overlays. And this one was done with a custom Sargent brush, and then one of the default brushes, Grainy Water, which has been a brush that's been around for quite a long time and is a very versatile brush for not only painting with, but for blending. With the resat setting or the resaturation setting brought up on the brush, we can actually add color and paint with the brush. So it's a very, very versatile brush. Again, watercolor overlays. And I might tell you a little bit about my watercolor overlays. A lot of times, in fact, most of the time, what I like to do is create my watercolor overlays traditionally. So I will actually set up a workstation, get all my watercolor papers out, my paints, and work with gauze and materials and rice papers and salt and alcohol and all kinds of things to create some very, very interesting watercolor textures that I then scan into Photoshop and correct them, do any color corrections, and then use them in Painter for my process. So let's take a look at how to start a piece like this and incorporate color, texture, and patterns into your workflow. We're going to begin by opening a source image. Now, there is a couple of ways you can go about this. One of the things that I enjoy the clone method from time to time, but I think because I have come from a traditional background, I like to depend more upon my own color choices. I like to expand upon the idea a little bit, so oftentimes I'll simply bring the image in using the place command, or just simply open an image, get it color corrected and ready to go, making sure that it's on its own layer like you can see right here, changing it to multiply blend mode, going ahead and adding a layer which we're going to be using as our sketch layer, and then bringing the opacity down on the image that I placed here, and then just creating a real quick reference sketch that you can work from. At that point, I feel like I'm not depending upon a clone to do this, and I'm depending more upon building my skills with mixing colors, color harmonies, and working that way. However, if you do choose to open an image and use it as a clone, then your first option here would be to use File, quick clone method and go ahead and control the visibility of the layer, create your sketch, and go from that point on. So on a new layer, I create the sketch, and once that's completed, I'll lock that sketch layer. And you know, this is obvious because if I don't, oftentimes I'll end up painting on that layer, and I want to keep this sketch layer intact. Also remember, because you're on a layer, you have the ability to work with the opacity slider. So if that sketch is a little bit too dark, things are coming through a little bit too darkly for you, you want to tone it down, then you have the ability to just bring the opacity down on the sketch. And beyond that, you can delete the sketch layer if it's no longer working for you or you no longer need it in the process. So I want to emulate a traditional watercolor paper texture when I get started here. So let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to do that. First of all, I'm going to go up and choose File, New, and I have a pattern preset set up here already saved. It's a 10 by 10 at 150, so I'm going to go ahead and open that up. Now the real key to this is in your papers panel here. We have, I'm going to take a look at my papers library, and for this particular painting, I want to make sure that I'm using a watercolor type paper that has that rough texture, that watercolor look that I'm looking for. Again, this is where I will oftentimes scan my traditional watercolor papers, my Waterford, my Winsor Newton, my Strathmore, whatever it happens to be that I'm working on, into Photoshop, and I'll create a file, bring them into Painter, and capture them as paper textures. So you can see here that I've gone through and captured quite a few paper textures in Painter, and this is where I'm going to begin as I create my pattern. Now, the real fun part about this is that you can literally use anything in your paper textures, and those paper textures will also transcend into your patterns. So what we want to do here is to actually create a seamless pattern that is based upon these watercolor papers. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this watercolor R2 and make sure it's selected, and I'm going to take a look at my papers palette here and take a look at the settings that I have, and I'm going to go ahead and bring this up to about 100% here at the paper scale. Now I'm also going to drag out my patterns library, and we're going to go ahead and create a pattern that's based upon this paper texture. Before I do that, I'm going to need to use a very special brush, and I'm going to let you know that this brush is from the Patterns Pen Plus brush category by David Gell. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful support person, artist, and wonderful brushes that you can pick up from his site, jitterbrush.com. So if you haven't visited his site, do make sure that you check it out. And thank you, David, for sharing this beautiful brush with us. We're going to pick the WYSIWYG paper extractor, and with our, we're just working right on the canvas layer. And before I do this, I need to define the area that we're going to capture based upon this particular texture. So I've got the paper texture R2 selected. I'm going to come down to the flyout and choose, let's see, I need to be over here, and choose Define Pattern. And at that point, I'm going to go ahead and fill in this canvas with that beautiful watercolor paper texture. And that's ready and done. And at this point, For this step, I'm going to, okay, let me get my notes here. And you will notice on my paper, let's see, what am I going to do now? So what I want to do now is capture this pattern. So I'm going to go back up here, open the flyout, and simply choose Capture Pattern. Now, one of the things you'll have to remember on this is that this pattern is directly related to the paper scale here. So because we're going to be making it a seamless pattern, when we apply it, we can make sure that the scale is set for both the pattern and the paper texture and make sure that it's the same. And then we should be able to get that seamless appearance. If, however, you need to decrease it or increase it, you can simply do that by increasing the scale. So let's go ahead and call this the R2 watercolor, and we're going to make sure that it's the same so we always know where we are. And we're going to go ahead and select OK. And that watercolor R2 is going to open up right here, and here we have it saved in our pattern library, and we can go on now and use it. And at this point we don't need this anymore, so we'll just go ahead and close it and go back to our image. All right, so we're going to first of all start by applying that pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and select the watercolor layer here, and from the layers palette I'm just going to select New Layer, and we're going to go ahead now and fill that layer with a pattern. Now, one of the things that I wanted to point out here is if you are using the clone method and you want to fill your layer now with a pattern, make sure that it is set to source current pattern. That's important. Otherwise, you're going to fill that layer with the image, the current clone image. So just in case you are using that particular function, then make sure that on your clone source panel that is set to current pattern. So now using the Command F or Control F, Command F for Mac or Control F for PC, or you can simply use the good old paint bucket on the toolbar. We want to select pattern, and we're going to go ahead and fill that layer with our pattern. And you can see now that this has created a beautiful watercolor texture pattern. I like the scale. The scale is good for what we're going to be using in this particular technique, but don't feel that you can't go in and change this scale by just Control Z or Command Z, removing that fill and working with the scale on the patterns, and actually bringing it up, making it larger, or bringing it to the left and decreasing the size of the scale. The next thing we want to do is change that composite method to multiply. And when we do that, you'll notice now that that sketch layer is visible. And I'm going to go ahead and drag that sketch layer right up to the very top of the layer hierarchy here, below the image that I used as a reference. And at some point, if you're ready to leave this image here, you can simply just delete it and not use it any longer. So now we have a great great texture created, and we have our pattern fill ready to go, our sketch ready to go. And now we're going to talk about some of the really fun ways that you can incorporate texture into your process here. Again, I wanted to mention that a lot of these textures that I use are actual watercolors, natural media watercolors that I've scanned in to Photoshop and then bringing to Painter. Now, there's a couple of ways we're going to look at this. One way is simply by using the place command to bring in a texture. And the second way that we're going to look at this process is by using what we call the overlay composite method. So first of all, let's go ahead and use the place command, and I'm going to choose File, Place, And I'm going to go to my desktop and to my folder where I have some textures saved here. And I'm going to go ahead and choose this watercolor texture here and choose Open. Now you can see a little ghosting of the size of it, and we also of course have the option to resize once we place the image. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that at this point. I'm going to drag the layer again down below, and for this particular one I'm going to do a converting of the layer to the default, and then kind of take a look at it based upon where I want to place it and how large I want it to be. So I'm going to come up to the Edit Free Transform here and do a little resizing by holding the Shift key down to constrain the proportions. I'm going to just kind of place it where I think I might want to use it in the painting. Now I'm going to commit the transformation, and then we're going to change the blend mode to multiply or gel, whatever you happen, either one of those, because they're good transparent blending modes and they'll work really well for you. Now at this point I can still play a little bit with the position and where I want to put this. And one of the things right off the bat that I'm looking at as I start to compose the painting is that I think what I'd like to do is flip the image vertically. And the reason I'm saying that is because I like the way these paint drops are kind of flowing downward instead of upward. So that's something that I think I'll go ahead and keep it that way. Now I can also work a little bit with the layer opacity here and bring the layer opacity down. And I'm also going to clean this image up. Now a lot of times what happens is after you commit the image, you'll get a little bit of ghosting of the edge left. So I'm using the eraser and I'm just going to simply erase that out. Now I'm going to go over to one of the brushes that I'll be giving everybody from the webinar called Impressionist Sky, and it's a great brush, but I'm going to use it as a blender here. And on this layer I'm going to simply start going in and working in some of this color into the painting. Now as I put more pressure on the brush, now this is the thing that's important with this one, in the blending mode, as I add more pressure, you're going to be able to actually push that paint around a little bit. So if there's areas where I want to concentrate on creating some light, then I'll put a lot of pressure on the brush and just kind of pull out areas of light that I want to reveal here. And really I'm just using it simply here as a blender and not for necessarily adding any color. Again, the blend mode is set to gel. And you
Karen,
can see already that, yes.
What type of tablet are you using?
I'm using the Wacom Intuos 5. And I'm not using my art pen today, I'm just using my standard, I'm not using the 60 art pen, I'm using just the standard brush today.
Okay, great, thank you.
I love the Intuos 5. The learning curve was a little different on it, but I'm really enjoying it, and it's a nice, really a nice tablet. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and drag this sketch above this layer as well, and I'm also going to bring my paper texture up. So a lot of times I'm making sure that paper texture is at the top, sketch is next, and then the actual paint layer that we're working on is the next layer. So let's go ahead now and talk about another way that we can start to enhance and start filling in and working in the painting, and just to create this real spontaneous, full of texture and impressionistic type work. The next option is using what we call the overlay composite method. And the overlay combines colors while preserving the highlights and shadows of an image. So after we change a layer composite method to overlay, the texture is not going to be visible, but I'm going to show you how you can change that, and how this part of it becomes the part that I can spend just hours on. It's just a lot of fun to work this way. So I'm going to go ahead and again use the file place command, and I'm going to choose this texture here. And this actually is a really fun texture. It is one that I created traditionally, again, also by using gauze and letting it dry, and doing some spattering, and then actually picking up the gauze afterward, and it creates this really lovely array of textures. Now I'm going to go ahead and enlarge this just a little bit and let it cover a little bit more, and I'm going to also convert it to default, and then I'm going to again flip it because I think it's just going to work better for this particular painting flip this way. I'm going to go ahead and drag it down below the sketch layer, and I'm going to go ahead and drag the scan layer above it. Okay, so when I go ahead and start painting here, I'm going to show you what happens. I'm going to change this now to overlay method, and you'll notice now that it's disappeared. You can't see it. Now there also is a couple of ways to handle this. If you bring in a texture this way, you can use it either with the color intact, or you can desaturate it to black and white, where theoretically you're only picking up that color, that actual texture, and not the color within within the actual pattern. So to do that, of course, there's a couple of ways. I like using my little underpainting palette, and I'll actually bring the saturation down to all the way down to -139, which saturates it to black and white, and you can work with it that way. Otherwise, your effects menu, choose effects, tonal control, adjust colors, and simply bring the saturation down that way as well to black and white by just pulling it all the way over to the left. Now I'm going to go ahead now and add a watercolor layer, and we're going to choose New Watercolor Layer from the Layers panel. I'm going to make sure that this pattern texture is always up at the top. So anytime you paint below an overlay method, you want to make sure that you're always painting below that, and that anything you've done previously is always above the overlay composite method. Okay, so that's real important. You may be going along and all of a sudden say, okay, nothing's coming out, there's no paint, what am I doing wrong? And usually it's because you've got a gel method below here, or you've painted on something and it's just not going to show through on that layer. So make sure that you have it set to overlay, and then in any new painting you start, make sure that you start that on a new layer. So I'm going to go over to my Impressionist watercolors here, and we're going to pick up a brush called, let's see, where is it? The basic brush, and this one is just a nice watercolor brush where you can begin defining some of these areas and bringing in some values and colors. I had talked previously also about mixing colors, and based upon these two colors, kind of a warm blue and a warm orange, complement complementary colors. I've gone ahead and done a little bit of mixing here by simply adding a little bit of that complement to the blue and created a really nice array of colors that I can work with here. So these are some of the colors I think that I'll start with, and on that watercolor layer. Also, by the way, this is a pause diffusion setting here. So if you're going to be working with this brush, set the pause diffusion and go ahead and start, begin your painting, and then you can go ahead and let that pause diffusion go up, take it off, and it will diffuse the paint based upon where you've laid it down. So it's a real nice feature to use. I know Skip and I both enjoy that pause diffusion so much, and he's done some beautiful beautiful brushes with using pause diffusion.
And I just,
okay.
sorry,
Yes.
Karen, I just mentioned in the Q&A panel that people can go to the YouTube channel, to the Painter 12.2 playlist, and there's the videos from Skip there that go over that pause diffusion.
Oh, excellent. So as I start painting here, I'm going to pick up a little different color here. As I go into the background here, you can see some of that texture starting to come through from the overlay. Let me go in a little bit further here, so hopefully you can see this, and I'll let it diffuse a bit here. I can kind of see where, if I look at the layer here, by the way, I can kind of look at it and get an idea of where it is. So I can come down and kind of work through this area and start bringing out some of this real interesting, fun texture. And then, of course, adding additional color. Now, one of the things you're going to have to watch, and I can see it right here, and I'll mention this right now, if if you're not going to fill the entire canvas with that texture, now I can simply come back up here, choose Edit, Free Transform, and I can go ahead and resize that pattern, okay? So it takes up that whole texture, okay, that whole canvas. Because what you'll end up doing is getting a little line going there, and you don't want that. If you're just going to apply texture specifically to a certain place, then not a problem. You just can use that as kind of a guide and kind of get an idea of where you're applying texture and work with it that way. So you can see here that, we'll see how this all comes together. Every time I do one of these, it's always a little different. And I don't have pause diffusion on, so let me get that set, and then I can paint a little faster here. And then nothing's to say that you can't go in here with your, again, with that blender brush. I would have to convert that to a default layer, which I can do. Let's just change it to default. Oh, it's not letting me do it. I have to convert it first. There we go. And at that point, I can go in and use those same blender brushes to go over and soften areas. Again, I'm using that Sky Impressionist brush as the blender here. And might go back up to this layer and soften some of this in here. Come back down, pick up again uh, let's go to, again, the basic brush, and we'll enhance some of this texture over here as well. So you can see that you can really just go on and on with this. If I chose, you know, if I wanted to actually maybe work and add another texture over in this area here, I can go ahead and drag these layers up. And that isn't what I wanted to do. Making a mess of it now. There we go. I can continue here to add, you know, additional watercolor layers because we are, you know, working that watercolor mode here. And every texture that I add, you know, is going to, you know, we're going to be adding additional textures based upon this overlay method. So if I get to a point where, you know, I want to incorporate something new, and I can go ahead and select those layers and go ahead and drop those layers. And keeping the sketch intact, I'm going to, again, I mentioned earlier that in order to, you know, be able to achieve this look of overlays and these textures coming through, you need to always make sure that your canvas is blank or anything below that overlay is above it. So if I choose Control-A, which is going to select the whole image, and then select Float, I can go ahead and start again. I'm just going to simply change that to gel mode so everything is transparent now. We're going to go ahead and just pull that up to the top in case we do need it again. Texture at the top. And again, I'm going to choose File, Place. And I'm going to choose this pattern here called Provence Blue, and I'm going to open it. And I just, you know, you may want to use it as just, you know, a little extra texture or pattern that you want to apply in a certain area. But, you know, you basically have a theme going here that you're using watercolor, so you want to continue to make that kind of a transparent look. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this down below the paper and below the sketch. And I'm going to go ahead and change it to overlay. And again, it's disappeared. I'm going to go ahead and add a new watercolor layer. And make sure that that's placed below the pattern texture. And again, let's pick up maybe something different. This time, let's use, here's one I really like here. This sponge, Skip Allen Sponge 2 is a nice brush for creating texture. So let's maybe take this pretty blue in here, and we're going to start going over this area and just reveal some of that texture. So you can see how that's coming out.
This is very interesting.
And there you've kind of created an interesting little composition here with working with, you know, some good color harmony, and then of course adding, maybe I'll just pick up a little bit of that nice warm gold there and pull that in as well. So you're able to, continue to keep that transparent look or that watercolor look to your work as you're going along, and it's a way of really having a lot of fun with texture. Let me go in here again. And we'll soften this up a little bit. That area's bothering me a tad. And really, Tanya, I mean, this is just really it. If I wanted to, at this point, if I wanted to add maybe a little more texture in it, I would probably pick something like, again, that place command. I have a huge texture folder here that I use, so let me see. Something that, it has to be something that's going to work with your basic colors that you have set up here. So maybe we'll choose, something like this beautiful pattern here, watercolor pattern.
Karen.
Yeah.
Have you ever considered selling your textures?
No, but I would consider letting anybody who would like them have them.
Okay, we had Gail was saying earlier how she's just wondering how to get over an artist's block and how to create her own textures, and I don't know if you have any recommendations for that.
Getting over artist's block, oh, that's a such a good question, because for me, I believe that artwork, doing your art and taking part in art is definitely something that ebbs and flows. And there are times where, at Painter Talk, my forum, and of course at DAA and many of our classes, we've had this discussion a lot, because there are people that, including myself, it happens to all the time, where we can sit down in front of Painter or sit down and at our easel and paint to everything comes out effortlessly. And then there are other times where it is so difficult to complete anything and get anything out that looks like anything you'd like it to look like. So I think you have to be really patient with yourself and understand that when those times are happening, you have to accept it, and it might mean that you actually put down your stylus for a week or so and you don't paint at all. You may take a class, look at some tutorials online, things that will help to motivate you or get you inspired to go on. I think one of the things with Painter that I have loved for so many years is the possibilities are, just continue to present themselves day after day. There is not a day that goes by that I don't sit and learn something new about Painter and how to apply things, or a new brush, a new technique, whatever. So I also feel that oftentimes, because there are so many techniques that we can discover and learn about in Painter, that kind of can be overwhelming to somebody who's just coming into Painter. So again, that's where I talk about patience and being patient with yourself to learn the program well, to learn the fundamentals of the software, and to go forward from that point. But give yourself time to do that, work through it. In my, when I was first introduced to Painter, there are people that have helped me to get where I've come so far. People like Jenny Brown, who she was my, conscience when it came to making sure that all my I's, my T's were crossed and my I's were dotted. So, her for that. My students, you know, Skip and Victor and all these wonderful, wonderful students that have gone on to, you know, just take off with Painter. So give yourself patience, give yourself time, and if it means walking away for a while, you know, that's what you've got to do. You just got to walk away from it, and that inspiration will come back. I also am a believer that the seasons have a lot to do with creativity, and there are certain times of the year, like in the fall, where I feel like I'm most creative, where I can, you know, I'm really open to, you know, creating what I visualize. So Jeremy Sutton was one of the people who introduced me to collage, and from that point on I loved working with textures, I loved working with collage, and that's kind of where my focus has been. So I wouldn't call myself a portrait artist. There's some beautiful portrait artists out there. I love working with people, but I have found ways of working with portraits that emulate more the way that I enjoy working. So that's kind of the direction I've gone with portraits. So are there any questions, any other questions? I think, you know, this is a really fun way to work. I think you'll enjoy experimenting with this. It can be done in ArtRage, it can be done in Photoshop, the same type of approach, so if you enjoy working with those softwares as well. But I think in Painter, especially with these beautiful watercolor brushes that we have, and remember that it's not just watercolor. You can apply this same technique as I showed you in some of the slides to more opaque mediums as well, such as your acrylics and oils, and of course beautiful beautiful effects with pastels and chalks as well. So,
Okay, well, that was really wonderful, and you must have been a very thorough presenter because there weren't a whole ton of questions. I did address some as they were coming in, but I happen to have one for you.
yeah.
And I was wondering, you have all those pattern libraries, and do you recommend that you create the patterns at the size and resolution of the document that you're working on, or I saw you placing them and then resizing once you brought them into the document?
In the first step where we're actually going over the paper texture, the watercolor paper texture,
Mm-hmm.
you can do the same thing. So if you have in your paper textures, let me go over here to my libraries. If I have created, for example, the Provence blue was a pattern that I actually captured as a paper texture. And if I were to apply that, I would make sure that I applied it at the same scale the paper texture was with the actual pattern that I've created. So in that case, it is important to create that seamless effect when you apply that pattern. But a lot of times, I think, Tanya, it's because of the fact that I like to work so quickly and so fast that for me, sometimes just placing a texture on a layer, resizing it to the point where I want it, or just simply using it in that area that I want to use it is the quickest way for me. So it works two ways. I just tend to be very, very spontaneous, and the less that I have to move from here to here to here, and the more that I can just concentrate on my brushes and the actual image that I'm working on, the better for me. So I try to keep it simple and work as easy as I can for my particular process.
Okay, great. Thank you. I've got some more questions coming in here. Let me take a look. I was also wondering, and you may have mentioned this, what pencil you use to do the sketch.
Yes, the standard 2B pencil, but I'll tell you what, I like to actually increase the grain a little bit, and the default on that little pencil, I think I have that in my, right here, the default is 65%. on the grain, but I like to bring the grain setting up a little bit, and I also do something else, which is some people do, some people have never tried it before, but I like actually laying a piece of standard 8.5 by 11 white paper over the top of my drawing surface, my Wacom tablet, and I like to sketch that way because I like the tactile feeling. It gives a little more grainy, more realistic feel to my sketching working this way. So you might want to try that. It's kind of a fun way of getting a little more tactile feeling to your sketching. It's not quite as soft, and I like the actual textural effect that it gives, and it's just much more of a natural feel for me when I'm sketching. So 2B pencil.
Okay. And what are some of your favorite oil brushes for portrait painting?
My favorite, well, I'll tell you what, this little brush that I have, the Impressionist Sky brush, I'll make sure everybody gets a copy of that. I love that for working with skin. It's very, very soft. You can get some very, very nice blending with it and very, very soft skins. But I think the oily round is probably one of my favorite brushes for portrait painting. It has a bleed setting, it has a feature setting, so of course you can increase the bleed and create a more, get a very soft blended look, and decrease it and get a little bit more impasto or textural effect to the brush as well. So that's one of the brushes I really enjoy working with that way. The other one is the grainy water brush from the Blender's brush category. That brush, I tell you, it's just one of those standard brushes that is so versatile in the respect that, and I think I've got it in my Impressionist group here, grainy water. It has a reset setting, so again, when you use it, let's just pick up a color with reset enabled, and I need to go down on the canvas here. You can see some color here. It's going to pick up some of that texture, but you can see that with reset, it's adding color, and then of course if you bring it down to 0%, let me increase this brush size a tad, you can blend it and use it as a blender, and which is the default for it. Again, it has a bleed setting, which can be really handy, and of course a grain setting and a jitter setting as well. So it's another beautiful brush for, and I would just say it's a real standard brush for portrait work. It's used quite often by some of the masters that do such a beautiful job with portrait work.
Okay, there are a few questions that have come in. I know we're running short on time here, so I'll just throw this one out to you. There's a lot of people asking, you have a library of papers. Why are you choosing to then bring them in and turn them into patterns instead of just paper textures?
Yeah, and the reason I'm doing that is because I'm creating a seamless paper texture or a seamless pattern. And what happens oftentimes is when you simply apply a pattern without creating a seamless pattern, and that's why this WYSIWYG brush is so important to this process. This is the brush that you want to use to create these seamless patterns. What you'll get is tiling, and we don't, by doing it this way, we're able to get away from that tiling effect. And if we're basing it upon the size and scale of the paper texture and basing the pattern upon the same size and scale as the paper texture, then we get away from that tiling. So that's the real essence of doing it this way, just simply put.
Okay, and one last question. Do you ever print your work, and if so, do you have a printer at home, and what kind of paper do you print on? Oh,
Yeah. Um, I I actually I actually don't print much at home. I will print for greeting cards and things like that. I'll use Strathmore and Winsor Newton watercolor papers that are pre-scored, and then I can cut my own cards from them. But I do a lot of, if I'm going to print something, I usually will do it outside at an outside printer. And uh, for quick turnarounds, I use a printing source called finerworks.com. They are, they've been around for quite a while now, and they, continue to offer more and more beautiful papers. So they've been getting into some of the beautiful archival watercolor papers for printing canvases, and they're really reasonably priced as well. I also have another printer that is in the Santa Cruz area that is, if I'm doing something that just has to be perfect, color corrected, then I will send it to them to use as well. But for the most part, Finerworks does a beautiful job. Their work is very, very nice. I mean, everything's ready to go if you need to frame it after getting it, or you're going to do embellishing. I use them quite often because a lot of times I may take a piece similar to this, have it printed by Finerworks, and then I'll do embellishing actually right on top of it. I embellish with traditional watercolor, pastels, and a lot of times I use gold leaf as well. So there's really nothing that I don't use for embellishing. I tend to really enjoy, again, from going in this direction by developing texture using Painter, then printing it out and actually going into it further with embellishing with watercolor inks, a lot of water-soluble and inks that I'll use. Just lots of fun. So from this point, even with a piece like this, it doesn't necessarily end. You can continue going on rice paper overlays, different papers and tissues, and a piece like this I would probably enjoy using painted tissue paper and applying it with an acrylic gel medium and going over it and creating some additional texture, and especially if I was going to be, framing it and using it that way. So,
okay, that was
lots of fun.
very detailed answer, and as you keep telling people more, they keep asking for more. So what I think we'll do is follow up with the remainder of these printing questions, if that's okay with you, after
Sure.
the webinar. There's just a few more that have come in here, and I also wanted to let you know how much praise you're getting in the Q&A panel right now. Everyone is saying how patient you are, you're a wonderful presenter, demonstrator, teacher, and they're very thankful, Karen, and so are we.
Thank you very much. It was great being here today, and like I said, Tanya sent me a wonderful report that had quite a few questions on it, and what I'll do in the next few weeks is try and answer those questions, and some of them that may need more explanation I'll actually put on the blog and do videos for you on those. So, but I'll prepare some papers, some patterns, some brushes, and make sure those are on the website for you here in the next few days as well. So.
Okay, well that's going so far above and beyond. Thank you so much, Karen.
You're welcome, Tanya. Thank you.
Yeah, so in the follow-up email, we'll be sure to put your KarenBonaker.com address in there. I've already reminded everyone of Skip's address and David Gell's and all the information, so we'll just be sure to remind you once again in the follow-up from GoToMeeting, and you can find this webinar. It'll be posted within the next week on youtube.com/painter tutorials. So thanks again, Karen, Thanks again to everyone who joined us today. We look forward to seeing you on future webinars. And this concludes, if I could speak, today's session. So I'm going to go ahead and close down the webinar, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Thank you.